April 10, 1939. Moscow, Staraya Square, Communist Party headquarters.
Nikolai Yezhov was summoned to the office of Georgy Malenkov, the head of the party's powerful cadres directorate. Just 4 months earlier, Yezhov had stood at the helm of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police and predecessor of the KGB, and served as Stalin's right-hand man. It was Yezhov who had been Stalin's chief executor of the Great Purge, known in Russia as the Great Terror of 1937 to 1938. Over those 2 brutal years, nearly 700,000 people were executed, and another million were sent to the vast labor camps of the GULAG. Yezhov entered the office, where Malenkov and the newly appointed head of the secret police, Lavrenti Beria, were already waiting for him. The conversation was brief. What was discussed remains unknown. Upon leaving the office, Yezhov was immediately arrested and sent to the high-security Suhanovo prison outside Moscow, a secret torture facility reserved for the most dangerous enemies of the people. He knew this prison all too well. Not long ago, Yezhov himself had tortured prisoners within these very walls. He loved to burst into interrogation rooms and beat detainees half to death, taking sheer pleasure in the violence. It was a behavior that went beyond simple cruelty. It was a severe, sadistic psychological disorder. During a search of Yezhov's apartment, investigators found flattened bullets fired from a Nagant revolver. These very bullets had been used in the execution of the famous Bolshevik leaders Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev. Yezhov had kept them hidden in his desk drawer. Even the most sinister executioners rarely kept such macabre murder trophies in their own homes. Yezhov was led into a cell and ordered to strip completely, including his undergarments. Standing naked against the wall, the disgraced Commissar was thoroughly inspected. Then, the guards threw him a pair of rough tarpaulin boots and a worn, oversized uniform. The tunic fit him like a dress, and the trousers were so large he was forced to hold them up with his hands. During his very first interrogation, senior NKVD investigator Boris Rodos presented the charges.
You have been arrested as a traitor to the party, an enemy of the people, and an agent of foreign intelligence. We suggest that, without waiting for further exposure, you immediately begin confessing to your treacherous work against the party and the Soviet state.
Yezhov knew exactly what lay ahead. After all, he was the one who had fine-tuned this very machine of repression. He signed every confession, fully aware that if he refused, he would be tortured until he signed anyway. In the archives of the Lubyanka, the notorious headquarters of the Soviet secret police, lie 12 volumes of criminal case number 510, detailing the charges of counter-revolutionary activity and espionage against Yezhov. Within these files lies the fate of a ruthless executioner who came to symbolize a terrifying era known as Yezhovshchina, the bloodiest era of Stalin's purges. We will open these archives to understand how Yezhov, a man with only 2 years of primary education, lacking charisma, intellect, or even a proper working-class background, managed to rise to the very pinnacle of power, becoming effectively the 3rd most powerful man in the state after Joseph Stalin and Premier Vyacheslav Molotov. In his official party records and autobiographies, Yezhov claimed he was born in 1895 in St. Petersburg, the son of a Russian metal caster. But this was a calculated lie. Yezhov was reinventing his past to fabricate a politically correct working-class background. His father, Ivan Yezhov, was actually a native of the Tula Governorate. After completing his conscript military service in Lithuania, he stayed there, married a local Lithuanian woman, and became a policeman under the Tsarist regime. However, during his interrogation after his arrest, Yezhov admitted to a far deeper family secret. His father owned a tea house that actually operated as a brothel, and that was how the family made their money, In the Soviet state, being the son of a czarist policeman, a direct collaborator of the hated old regime, branded a person as a class enemy. For Yezhov, the revelation of these facts would have spelled the immediate end of his political career. At school, Nikolai studied only sporadically, later describing his education as incomplete elementary. In 1906, when Nikolai was only 11 years old, he was sent to a relative in St. Petersburg to apprentice in the tailoring trade. His master not only beat the young apprentice, but also coerced him into an inappropriate relationship. In 1915, during World War I, Yezhov volunteered for the front, was wounded, fell ill, and was eventually declared unfit for active military service due to his abnormally short height, just 4 feet 11 inches. People often mocked the tiny soldier for his oversized head and bowed legs. However, Yezhov had his strengths. He was industrious, self-educated, possessed an exceptional memory, and was a talented singer. Nikolai even auditioned for a famous opera tenor who told him,
"You have a voice, but with your height, you will never be a soloist. You had better sing in the choir, behind the backs of others."
In his autobiographies, Yezhov claimed he joined the Bolshevik Party in May 1917. However, this too was a lie. The party archives revealed documents showing that Yezhov actually joined only in August 1917. This was a critical distinction. In the Soviet hierarchy, those who managed to join the Bolsheviks before the summer of 1917, during the initial struggle for power, were considered part of Lenin's Old Guard, or Old Bolsheviks. It was these individuals who occupied key positions after the seizure of power, and this lie heavily aided Yezhov in climbing the career ladder. In the autumn of 1917, Yezhov fell ill and remained in the hospital for 3 months. Years later, when Yezhov became the all-powerful head of the NKVD, a heroic myth would be invented in The Short Course on the History of the Communist Party, the ultimate propaganda book of the Stalinist regime. The story claimed that in October 1917, Yezhov personally led soldiers in an uprising against the government. In 1919, Yezhov was drafted into the Red Army and sent to a military radio engineering base in Saratov, where he served as a clerk under the political commissar. Within 6 months, he was appointed political commissar of the school that trained military radio specialists. By 1921, Yezhov became the political commissar of the entire base. Despite his lack of formal education, he showed rare diligence and delved deeply into every detail. His bureaucratic zeal was noticed, and his party career began its slow but steady rise. Soon, Yezhov married, and this union became a powerful accelerator for his career. Nikolai's wife was a tall, beautiful Cossack woman named Antonina Titova. In contrast to the poorly educated Yezhov, she held a university degree and had completed postgraduate studies at the Moscow Agricultural Academy. To a modern observer, the union of a striking intellectual and an uneducated dwarf seems bizarre. But in early Soviet society, physical beauty was condemned as a bourgeois prejudice. Far more important were revolutionary zeal, party experience, and a proper proletarian background. For a fanatical and goal-oriented Bolshevik like Antonina Titova, the hard-working Commissar Yezhov seemed like the ideal partner. Furthermore, in his youth, Nikolai was not yet the monster he would become in 1937. Contemporaries remembered him as a gentle, obliging man who possessed a striking, almost hypnotic charm. He was always ready to help, and his fragile build often evoked tender, almost maternal feelings in women. Antonina, too, likely saw in him a vulnerable and talented young man. Titova worked as a secretary for a regional party committee in Kazan. In 1924, she left for Moscow to study at the academy. Utilizing her connections in the central party organs, she personally secured her husband's transfer to Moscow. Without Antonina, Yezhov would have likely spent the rest of his days rotting in obscure provincial party organizations. In Moscow, Yezhov's career quickly took off. In December 1925, he was sent as a delegate to the 14th Party Congress. At the Congress, he met Ivan Moskvin, an influential official in the Central Committee's party apparatus. This meeting marked a pivotal turning point in Nikolai's career. Moskvin invited Yezhov to serve as an instructor in the Central Committee's Organization and Distribution Department, a critical personnel office that controlled all appointments across the country. Moskvin highly praised Yezhov's work ethic.
I don't know a more perfect worker, or rather executor, than Yezhov. Once you assign him a task, you never need to double-check his work. You can be absolutely sure he will get it done. Yezhov has only one, albeit significant, flaw. He doesn't know how to stop. Sometimes there are situations where it is impossible to do something, where you must stop. Yezhov never stops, and sometimes you have to watch him closely just to stop him in time.
Yezhov was a frequent guest at the Moskvin's home. Moskvin's wife, Sophia, doted on Nikolai, feeding him delicious dinners and offering him the best portions, affectionately saying,
"You are so small, just like a little sparrow. You need to eat more."
She had no idea that these words deeply wounded the fragile pride of the ambitious dwarf. 10 years later, when Moskvin was arrested in 1937, his wife was also dragged into the cells as well. Normally, the wives of enemies of the people were sent to labor camps, but in this case, Yezhov personally ordered his men to extract a confession from Sophia, alleging she had tried to poison him. She was sentenced to death and executed. In November 1930, Moskvin was promoted to a high-ranking government post, and Yezhov became the head of the party's cadres department, taking his former boss's place. It was during this time that he became closely acquainted with Joseph Stalin, who quickly appreciated the bureaucrat's relentless efficiency. Yezhov diligently carried out Stalin's campaign to purge the Communist Party ranks. The leader was highly pleased with his work. Appreciating Yezhov's absolute loyalty and execution, Stalin began to actively promote him up the career ladder. In 1934, following the assassination of Sergei Kirov, the popular leader of Leningrad's communists and a close personal friend of Stalin, Yezhov was effectively placed in charge of the investigation by Stalin's personal decree. Although Kirov's killer had been caught at the scene, Stalin personally instructed Yezhov to find the masterminds behind the assassination. He ordered him to look specifically among Leon Trotsky's supporters and the Leningrad opposition, led by Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev. Yezhov threw himself into the case with ruthless zeal, but he was ultimately unable to prove that Zinoviev and Kamenev had orchestrated Kirov's murder. Nevertheless, Stalin remained pleased with Yezhov's efforts. Zinoviev and Kamenev, having admitted moral responsibility for the assassination, were convicted and given prison sentences. A new promotion awaited Yezhov. In 1935, he became a secretary of the Central Committee and took charge of the Party Control Commission, the supreme disciplinary body of the Communist Party. Yezhov was granted the power to personally decide the political fate of the old Bolsheviks who opposed Stalin's policies. By this time, the internal party struggle had reached its final stage. The first high-profile show trials of party oppositionists, organized by Genrikh Yagoda, the then head of the NKVD, were no longer satisfying to Stalin's hardliners. The machinery was moving too slowly and selectively. Stalin demanded terror on an entirely different scale. Following the first Moscow show trial in August 1936, where the primary defendants were once again Zinoviev and Kamenev, Stalin decided that a more energetic and ruthless executioner was needed at the helm of the NKVD. In September 1936, the Central Committee received a telegram from Sochi, signed by Stalin and his close ally Andrei Zhdanov, who were there on vacation. The telegram proposed that Yezhov be immediately appointed head of the NKVD, as Yagoda had failed to rise to the occasion in unmasking the conspirators. The very next day, Yezhov became the new master of the Soviet secret police. Upon taking office as People's Commissar of Internal Affairs, Yezhov famously declared to the secret police officers,
"Do not look at my short stature. My hands are strong. I will arrest and execute anyone who dares to slow down the struggle against our enemies."
Yezhov began his tenure as head of the NKVD with a ruthless purge of his own subordinates. Across the country, 2,273 state security officers were arrested, including the former People's Commissar, Genrikh Yagoda. Yezhov personally interrogated and mercilessly beat his former boss with particular zeal. The wheel of the Great Purge was now spinning. On July 30th, 1937, Yezhov signed the secret order number 00447, the blueprint for the mass terror. Its true initiator was Stalin himself. This was conclusively proven by historian Oleg Hlevnyuk, the world's leading authority on the Stalinist era, who conducted groundbreaking research within the declassified Soviet archives.
Without Stalin's personal orders, the Great Purge simply would not have existed. Voluminous archival documents prove that Stalin not only initiated all key decisions regarding the mass repressions, but he also delved into the smallest details, demanded new arrests, personally signed execution lists, and issued direct orders for the use of torture.
Initially, the terror targeted party and state officials who did not align with Stalin's policies. But soon, the repressions became a mass campaign, affecting the most diverse segments of the population. Former opposition members, party functionaries of the Old Guard, former socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks, the rival socialist parties of the Bolsheviks, former Tsarist officers, policemen, civil servants, representatives of the nobility and clergy, and wealthy peasants whose property had been confiscated by the Soviet regime. In Stalin's view, all of these people were untrustworthy and could strike a blow in the back in the event of a war with Germany. On Yezhov's initiative, the notorious troikas were revived, extrajudicial three-man tribunals consisting of the local head of the NKVD, the party secretary, and the prosecutor. Sentences were handed down in haste, without defense lawyers or the right to appeal, often in absentia, and as a rule, the executions were carried out immediately. Soviet propaganda, which praised the valiant secret police for saving the country from fascist spies, created an atmosphere of hysteria and fear throughout society. Yezhov worked tirelessly. From January 1937 to August 1938, he sent Stalin roughly 15,000 special reports detailing arrests and interrogation transcripts. During this period, the only person who met with Stalin more often than Yezhov was the head of the Soviet government, Premier Vyacheslav Molotov. In total, during the period of Yezhovshchina, 1.37 million people were arrested, half of whom were executed. Yezhov personally participated in the torture and interrogations. Nikita Khrushchev recalled the following incident in his memoirs.
"I went into Yezhov's office at the Central Committee headquarters and saw dark stains of dried blood on the hem and cuffs of his military tunic. To my question, 'What happened?' Yezhov replied with ecstasy, 'These are stains to be proud of. It's the blood of enemies of the revolution.'"
And here is what Yezhov's deputy, Mikhail Frenovsky, testified during his own interrogation.
Yezhov flew into a murderous rage at the sight of tall, physically strong military commanders, such as the deputy commander of the Moscow military district, Anton Bulin, and personally beat them with a rubber hose half to death in Lefortovo prison.
On July 17, 1937, Yezhov was awarded the Order of Lenin for outstanding achievements in leading the organs of the NKVD. And the newspaper Pravda published an ode by the Kazakh folk poet Jambul.
"In the flash of lightning, we came to know your name, Yezhov, our sharp-sighted and wise Commissar."
By the end of 1938, Stalin decided to halt the terror. But not out of mercy. The Purge had simply achieved its political goals, destroying any potential opposition ahead of the looming war. Now, Stalin needed to calm a terrified society and find a scapegoat upon whom to blame all the atrocities. Yezhov, whose hands were covered in blood up to his elbows, was the perfect sacrificial lamb. Furthermore, the bloody dwarf, who had begun to see himself as the master of human destinies, had become dangerous to the leader himself. Stalin was also deeply suspicious of Yezhov's wife, Evgenia Hayutina. She led a bohemian lifestyle, and among her many lovers was the deputy chairman of the state bank, Grigory Arkus, who had previously been executed as a participant in a Trotskyite conspiracy. Stalin persistently recommended that Yezhov divorce his wife. Nikolai procrastinated with the divorce, which only deepened the leader's suspicions. Yezhov met his second wife, a young journalist named Yevgenia Hayutina, née Feigenberg, in 1929, while vacationing at a health resort in Sochi. Yevgenia was the daughter of a merchant from Gomel. Beautiful and lively, she loved champagne, the foxtrot, and turning men's heads. Her first husband, Lazar Hayutin, was quickly cast aside. But her second, Alexander Gladun, the director of the Moscow publishing house Economic Life, fulfilled her expectations and moved Yevgenia to Moscow. The life she had always dreamed of began: elegant dresses, trips abroad, and meetings with dictators and celebrities. However, her relationship with Gladun soon cooled, perhaps due to Yevgenia's highly flirtatious nature. Soon, Nikolai Yezhov crossed her path, then still an obscure official in the Central Committee. But the sharp-eyed Yevgenia saw his career potential, and she was not mistaken. The resort romance quickly blossomed into a marriage proposal. Both Hayutina and Yezhov divorced their respective spouses and married. Having never been coddled, Yezhov gladly accepted the domestic care his wife surrounded him with. Their barren state apartment was soon adorned with carpets, framed portraits, and delicate feminine trinkets. In the evening, a hot dinner always awaited the exhausted Nikolai. His wife persuaded him to acquire a dacha, where she even raised peacocks. She did not neglect herself either. A subsequent search of Yezhov's apartment uncovered more than 100 dresses, dozens of blouses and hats, and 5 expensive fur coats. Through Yevgenia's efforts, their home became a popular literary salon, frequented by party officials, writers, and actors. Some of them, such as the famous writer Isaac Babel, the prominent journalist Mikhail Koltsov, and the future Nobel laureate Mikhail Sholokhov, became Yevgenia's lovers. Yezhov himself was no stranger to infidelity and kept mistresses of his own. One of them was his wife's longtime friend, Zinaida Glikina. The two friends kept no secrets from each other. In their social circle, infidelity was not considered a serious transgression. However, Stalin was displeased. He felt Yezhov's wife was bringing discredit to the people's Commissar. One day, the leader simply ordered Yezhov to divorce Yevgenia. Disobedience was out of the question. In the autumn of 1938, Yezhov declared his wife mentally unstable and confined her to a psychiatric clinic. Shortly thereafter, 2 of Hayutina's closest friends were arrested, and she herself received an anonymous letter accusing her of espionage. Amid this mounting pressure, Yevgenia suffered a nervous breakdown. Her husband sent her sedatives and a small trinket. According to some historians, this trinket was a prearranged signal: this is the end. A few days later, she died of an overdose of luminol. To this day, it remains unresolved whether Yevgenia poisoned herself after receiving the signal from her husband, or if she was given assistance on Yezhov's direct orders. On March 2, 1938, the third Moscow show trial began, targeting the so-called right Trotskyite bloc. Alongside the primary defendants, former party leaders Alexei Rykov and Nikolai Bukharin, the dock was shared by Genrikh Yagoda, the chief organizer of the first Moscow trial. 10 days later, the court sentenced 17 defendants to death, including Yagoda, the former head of the secret police. The sentence was carried out 5 days later at the Kommunarka execution grounds outside Moscow. By the autumn of 1938, the clouds began to gather over Yezhov himself. The first warning sign had come in August, when his powerful first deputy, Mikhail Fernovsky, was removed and replaced by Lavrenti Beria. In November, at a Politburo meeting, a secret denunciation against Yezhov was reviewed. It had been submitted by Viktor Zhuravlev, the head of the regional NKVD office in Ivanovo. Zhuravlev reported that he had repeatedly warned the Commissar about the illegal arrests of innocent people, but Yezhov had allegedly ignored his warnings. On November 24th, Yezhov was stripped of his position as head of the secret police and transferred to the minor post of Soviet Minister of Water Transport, while retaining his seat as a Central Committee secretary. Yezhov understood what this meant and turned to heavy, non-stop drinking. He rarely showed up at his new ministry, and when he did, he was pale and bloated from alcohol. With a trembling hand, he wrote letters to Stalin, begging for forgiveness and a chance to correct his mistakes, but it was all in vain. The inevitable end was approaching. In March 1939, Yezhov was not re-elected to the Central Committee. On April 9th, he was stripped of his post as Minister of Water Transport, and the very next day, he was arrested. The investigation into the case of the former NKVD chief lasted for 10 months. According to the indictment, Yezhov and his accomplices, Mikhail Fernovsky, Mikhail Evdokimov, and Semyon Dagin, were plotting a coup and an assassination attempt against party and government leaders, while planting spy rings in various political and military organizations. In addition, Yezhov was accused of homosexuality, which was a criminal offense in the Soviet Union at the time. At his trial, Yezhov repudiated all of his confessions, explaining that he had signed them under torture.
I did not organize any conspiracy against the party and the government. On the contrary, I did everything in my power to uncover conspiracies. I purged 14,000 secret police officers. But my great guilt lies in the fact that I did not purge enough of them. I was surrounded by enemies of the people, my own enemies, and I failed to see them.
The court's deliberations were brief. On February 3, 1940, Vasily Ulrich, the notorious chief military judge of the Soviet Union, read out the sentence, death by firing squad and the confiscation of all property. The sentence was carried out the very next day. According to Pavel Sudoplatov, a high-ranking Soviet intelligence officer, as Yezhov was led to his execution, he sang the communist anthem, the Internationale. The Soviet press reported absolutely nothing about Yezhov's arrest and execution. The master of terror had simply vanished. His name was erased from the short course on the history of the Communist Party, and his image began to be airbrushed out of all official photographs alongside Stalin. The only clues that he was no longer a hero of the Soviet Union were the quiet renaming of the streets and towns that had been established in his honor. Because of this extreme secrecy, the most incredible rumors circulated about Yezhov, even whispers that he had escaped to Nazi Germany to serve as a personal advisor to Adolf Hitler.